In 2007, TV network CBS dropped 40 kids in the middle of the New Mexico desert as part of a brand new reality show. These kids would have to build their own society from scratch. And if this sounds like Lord of the Flies to you, well, it was meant to.
We were on this mission together, and we were going to prove to the world that we could make a better society than adults could.
I'm Josh Gwynn, and I want to know what this wild TV experiment was really about. Split Screen, Kid Nation, a 6-part podcast from CBC. Available now.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Nobody would have thought anything about it normally. A book festival in Ottawa. Some food vendors, a bunch of panels, events, discussions. Sure, okay. But then some stories started to trickle out that maybe this event was a little bit off, different, not your usual literary-minded spring event in the nation's capital. And the more we learn about the Ottawa International Food and Book Expo, the stranger it gets. Far-right speakers, talent walkouts, sponsors cutting ties, conspiracy literature, risque promo videos. It all just seems supremely odd. So what exactly went down in Ottawa at the end of April? I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Luc LeBrun is the editor of Press Progress, which has been covering this festival, or what are we going to call it, Luc?
It's the Ottawa International Food and Book Expo.
What was it supposed to be? And I mean this mostly to ask, to people who were planning on attending when it was marketed to people in Ottawa and beyond. What might people have expected?
Well, your first reaction when you hear the name is you might think that it's pretty unassuming. It sounds like, many other festivals that happen in Ottawa or any other city or town in Canada. Just to situate it, first of all, this was an event at Lansdowne Park in Ottawa, which is, kind of an old fairground area that's now a big urban park. We have our local football stadium there. There's a hockey arena. There's restaurants, farmers markets on the weekend. So lots of families would be kind of walking around this area. And this book festival was being held in the historic horticulture building. So kind of a big hall. It's used for weddings and charity galas, things like that. So it was billing itself as an event for authors where they could promote their books. There's a big focus on independent and self-published authors. They've had a couple of these in previous years, mostly without controversy, although I have heard from people in the local literary community and arts and culture scene that people weren't really so sure about the organizer and just the way that he would go about doing his business. So he's charging people pretty high amounts for renting stalls at these book festivals. So a couple red flags, but, nothing too out of the ordinary. This year also there were workshops and seminars on creative writing, how to publish your own book, some panel discussions with authors. The Mexican Embassy was actually hosting a showcase for Mexican-Canadian authors. And to top this all off, the MCs for this year's event were former Much Music VJ Bill Welichka and Nora Loretto, who's a well-known lefty journalist. So, on the face of it, seems like a pretty legitimate festival, not too different from many others. And, but once you started scratching at the surface a little bit, you started to notice that something was a little bit off.
Take us back to when that happened for you and others. When did you kind of get wind that something about this was a little bit weird or different?
Yeah, so what first triggered it for me, and when it first popped up on my radar, was there's this local group called Community Solidarity Ottawa. This is a community group that got organized during the Freedom Convoy in response to the way the convoy was harassing and impacting people in Ottawa's residential neighborhoods. So they put out a community alert on the Friday before the weekend festival, basically warning that there were a number of far-right figures associated with the convoy who were going to be appearing as speakers. Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada. Randy Hillier, who's a former Ontario PC MPP. He got actually kicked out by Doug Ford from the party, ended up becoming an anti-lockdown leader, and he's actually now facing a slew of criminal charges over his involvement with the Freedom Convoy. another person by the name of Tom Quiggin. He was involved with the convoy's leadership team. He appeared at the press conferences that the Freedom Convoy had during February 2022. And he also put out these daily intelligence briefings, just sort of giving the convoy people an update on what the police were doing and all that kind of stuff. And then the fourth person was Andrew Lawton. He's a media personality with the right-wing outlet True North. And basically, Community Solidarity Ottawa's concern was that if you have an event with these kinds of speakers, they are going to attract their supporters into a space that, as I said, is, often has families that are, in the area for sporting events or for farmers markets. So they were concerned that you might have these volatile supporters of, Maxime Bernier or whoever in a community space with these, families who don't really know what's going on. So when I saw Community Solidarity Ottawa's alert, and to their credit, they did a lot of the original research into this festival and sort of highlighting some of the far-right connections. But, when I started looking into it, it just got weirder and weirder and weirder. So the book festival is promoting itself with these video ads featuring sort of scantily clad women in suggestive poses.
Okay.
There's this one, video of a woman in lingerie and she's eating a strawberry. There's another one with a model dressed as a schoolgirl who's taking off her shirt for some reason. And, you kind of look at this and you're wondering, okay, this is a book festival? Why would you market your book festival that way?
Yeah.
Then there's these other videos that have what appear to be Eastern European actors reading a script in front of a green screen. And, it's just very strange. And then, you look at the website and it's promoting, in addition to, literary type events, it's also promoting these weird dating events. So one that caught my eye was this cougar dating event for women in their 50s and guys in their 20s. So, getting stranger and stranger. The main thing, though, for me is that when I looked at their website, they had logos of some pretty big name sponsors that seemed pretty legitimate on the surface. So you had the Ottawa Public Library, the Hill Times newspaper. There were 3 different PBS affiliates in upstate New York. There was like WestJet, just a whole bunch of different organizations that, don't really seem like they would be affiliated with an event with Maxime Bernier.
Right. So
I'm wondering, why is the Ottawa Public Library and PBS sponsoring this event? So I started contacting the sponsors and, asking them, why are you sponsoring this event? And several of them actually told me that they were not sponsors. They had nothing to do with this festival, and they actually wanted their logos off the website. But then, I also did hear from one of the PBS affiliates told me that they actually were a media sponsor, but they told me it was a non-monetary thing. And they thought they were just, advertising the book festival on PBS. And in exchange, they were going to, get some promotion at the event. I discovered that most of the people listed as employees on the festival's website were actually fake, and they used stock photo images for themselves. And one of the people who was listed as the volunteer coordinator, he's actually listed on the main organizer of the book festival's book publishing website as the author of books about aliens and COVID-19 conspiracies, and also, strangely, a book about expanding the CFL to other countries, including Australia and Mexico for some reason.
Okay.
Speaking of Mexico, so I actually ended up contacting the Mexican embassy, and they emailed me back the night before the festival to tell me that they were pulling out. They were kind of cagey about their reasons, but it did seem like they had done their own research after I contacted them and then realized that this was not the event that they were signing up for. So I published my story on the Saturday, the first day of the festival. And it was actually really interesting, the reaction that I got, because, all through the day, I just kept getting email after email after email from sponsors and also from vendors who were just proactively reaching out to me to tell me that they were cutting ties with this festival. So Ottawa Tourism, they had been promoting the festival. They contacted me and said that the festival had misrepresented itself to them and they were, cutting all ties with it. PBS affiliate in Watertown, New York, contacted me and thanked me for bringing this to their attention because they had no idea that they were sponsoring an event with far-right figures and fringe groups.
Right.
And both of the MCs, Bill Wilichka and Nora Loretto, apparently walked out right in the middle of the festival after my story started circulating around and people kind of started connecting the dots and realizing that the things that they initially realized felt were off were actually much weirder than they initially believed.
You went to this festival, though, and you spoke to a number of the vendors and folks around there. What was it like? What were they telling you about how it was organized? Like, give us a sense of what it was like on site.
Yeah, so I stopped by a couple of times over the weekend. I got to say that for all of the big names that they had, it was actually very sparsely attended. And when you walked around the hall, it was just this kind of really incoherent collection of vendors and stalls. So you had, food vendors, you had some legitimate authors, but then you also had these sort of new age groups and groups that I would actually describe as cults. So it was really a confusing mix of people. I really have to say, though, that the food vendors specifically, because a number of them reached out to me after I published my first story, they felt very misled and felt very angry with the event organizer because they ended up losing quite a bit of money. So one vendor I spoke to, he runs an oyster bar. He told me he spent $500 to rent a stall at this event. At the end of the day, he lost $2,000 in total. He says that he had to throw out about $500 worth of oysters.
Wow.
Yeah, he told me that basically this was presented to him originally as a major gourmet food event with top local restaurants. There'd be food and wine and people talking about books. So it sounded pretty, normal to him.
And instead, he's at tables next to people selling cultish material, I guess. Tell me a little bit more about some of the kind of weirder, whether they're cults or not, folks who had their stuff on display there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there were vendors who had, they're giving out kind of like, it wasn't so much, good literature. It was more sort of, conspiratorial propaganda or, sort of promotional pamphlets, things like that. So you had, anti-vaxxers and COVID-19 conspiracy type content, let's say. There were people promoting alternative medicine books, New Age spirituality, so on and so forth. There was this one vendor who was offering free stress tests and giving away books by Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. There was another vendor called the Geophilosophical Association of Anthropological and Cultural Studies. Really long sentence there. But if you actually look into them, they were founded in the 1970s by a New Age spiritual leader who's, written a lot about sexual alchemy and the end of the world. So it kind of gives you a sense of their outlook on the world. There was also another group called the Grail Foundation. I actually ended up talking to them at their table for a little bit. They denied to me that they were a religion, and they actually denied that they were an organization too. It was really hard to pin down what exactly they were presenting themselves as, but they finally kind of described themselves to me as a sort of book club that is devoted to promoting the writings of a messianic kind of author who calls himself the Servant of the Light. After meeting with them, they sent me home with a number of promotional materials and pamphlets and things like that so I could learn more about them. And I later discovered that they actually believe that a great comet will descend upon the Earth. They call this the second Star of Bethlehem. They believe this will destroy the Earth and human civilization and purify the planet. So, between those people and the oysters, it's a very strange mix of vendors.
In 2007, TV network CBS dropped 40 kids in the middle of the New Mexico desert as part of a brand new reality show. These kids would have to build their own society from scratch. And if this sounds like Lord of the Flies to you, well, it was meant to.
We were on this mission together, and we were going to prove to the world that we could make a better society than adults could.
I'm Josh Gwynn, and I want to know what this wild TV experiment was really about. Split Screen, Kid Nation, a 6-part podcast from CBC. Available now.
In terms of the speakers and the panels and the discussions that were had, was it far-right talking points that people were accusing them of? Were there substantive discussions about books, even self-published books? Like, what do we know about the actual content from the festival?
I mean, I think it's fair to say that the panel discussions themselves were just as incoherent as the floor of vendors. There was one event which had Andrew Lawton, Randy Hillier, and an anti-vaxxer. It was a pretty, right-wing, sort of convoy-adjacent type conversation that was had. But the main event really was the panel with Maxime Bernier. So, this panel had Maxime Bernier, Senator Kim Pate, former CBC Ottawa news anchor Adrian Harewood. There was a minister from the United Church, and it was moderated by Nora Loretto. So, in fairness, this was a diverse group of panelists, but it's so diverse that it's almost, incoherent. At one point, this panel actually spiraled out of control during the Q&A session. I actually clipped the video of it and included in the article. You see one audience member who starts yelling and heckling at the Senator Pate, about COVID-19 lockdowns. He keeps pressing her to basically say on the record that they will never bring in another lockdown ever. It gets very heated and very emotional. Towards the end, there was another person who was actually an author at the event, but also was a People's Party of Canada candidate in Ottawa Centre. She actually hijacked a microphone and started using the opportunity to promote her anti-vaccine book. And this led to this melee on the stage. People were yelling. People were trying to take microphones away from one another. Maxime Bernier actually at one point kind of hopped up and physically restrained the moderator and was yelling about free speech. It was just a complete mess. And if you actually see the video of this, it's actually kind of lucky that it didn't escalate further than that.
What do we know about the people who organized this event? And I guess importantly, have they provided any public comments to you or anyone else in their own defense, or just explaining what they were going for here and how this happened?
The main organizer of the event, his name is Ray Samuels, kind of an interesting character. He identifies himself as a People's Party activist. He actually serves as the leader of a provincial party called the Ontario People's Front, which is sort of a PPC spin-off party. It also talks about, issues to do with lockdowns and vaccine mandates and things like that. He's kind of a perennial fringe candidate in federal and provincial elections. 20 years ago, he actually ran for this sort of fringe party called the Canadian Action Party, which was led by a former cabinet minister who later became a kind of a big UFO activist named Paul Hellyer.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's got kind of these ties with, some pretty, fringy stuff. He's hosted events with David Icke, the conspiracy theorist who talks about the alien lizard people and all that stuff, if people are familiar with all those conspiracies. So he also runs a publishing house that specializes in self-publishing books, and quite a few of them are very strange. There's a lot of COVID-19 conspiracies, a lot of stuff about aliens. He has an entire section on his website about exopolitics, which is, our political relations with governments on other planets, basically. Also, interestingly, he is leading a consortium that is trying to build a 25,000-seat football stadium in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island for a new CFL expansion team.
What is it with this stuff in the CFL?
I don't know. It always comes back to the CFL for some reason. But, believe it or not, he gave a presentation to Charlottetown City Council about his plan to bring a CFL team to PEI. And it's actually been endorsed by the local Chamber of Commerce. And it's actually been kind of a local media story in the Maritimes over the last couple of months.
Interesting.
Again, the people in the Maritimes and PEI are not realizing what's going on in Ottawa. So everybody's kind of connecting the dots here. But in terms of what Ray told me, so I spoke to him the night before the festival. And, as we always do, we approach people with, the stuff that we're going to publish and ask them for their side of the story. And when I asked him about the sponsors, and, some of the sponsors saying that they never actually sponsored the event, he claimed that some of those were old sponsors from previous years, but couldn't really explain why they were still on the website listed as current sponsors. He at one point said he couldn't disclose anything further because of some sort of confidentiality agreement. He actually said at one point too that one of the PBS affiliates had, been a sponsor in the past, but they told me definitively that they never actually sponsored him. So there were some holes in his story, but that's his response to it. When I asked him specifically about the two employees for the festival who we found out were fake and they used stock photo images, he started getting very defensive with me. He started accusing me of using American-style sensationalist journalism tactics and said that this kind of journalism isn't welcome in Canada. He got very indignant with me. And when I specifically confronted him on the fact that one of his employees was on a UFO website, he actually hung up on me at that point. So yeah, I think that kind of speaks for itself.
Have laws been broken here? What happens next? Or is this just like, well, it was a cluster beep and let's move on, and sorry to the writers and vendors who thought they were attending something that they clearly weren't?
Yeah, well, I definitely have heard from a few people who were involved with the festival who felt misled, who say that they have actually already filed lawsuits about this with the organizer. A few others have kind of mused about it and they're kind of exploring the idea. So I think there might be something to it. Definitely, they feel like they were misled and they feel like the entire event was misrepresented. And it does seem like they have actually lost some money as a result of it. It's worth noting Ray, the event organizer, he's also making a variety of legal threats at a variety of different people. So we'll see if anything comes of that. To me, though, I think the moral of this entire story is that it is really important to do your research. It's important to check out, who it is you're getting yourself involved with before you actually do it. Because, I've actually heard from some people after I published my second story about this who were telling me that it sounds like Ray was contacting people out of the blue, telling them about this event and getting them kind of roped in. And they didn't look too deeply into it. In some cases, they looked at the website, saw the logos of what they thought were legitimate, companies, legitimate organizations.
Right.
In some cases, they saw speakers and personalities listed on the website that they also thought were kind of legitimate too. So, it's easy to see how people got roped in, but there does seem to be a pattern here where Ray was asking people to join. And then as soon as he got them to accept the invitation, he would ask them for promotional photos or for their logo so he could put that on the website and then leverage that to, rope other people into it. So I think on one level, it sort of speaks to the fact that, the reality of the internet nowadays, you don't really know who's on the other side of the screen when you're talking to them or when you're talking to them over email. So people do need to do their due diligence before agreeing to things because, in this case, there is a danger of associating yourself with an event that might be problematic because other people are going to then see your name listed on the website. It might be a name that they recognize or that they trust, and it sends them the signal that it's a legitimate event when it might not be. So, while I hate to lecture everyone on personal responsibility, I do think that we need to recognize that our choices and actions can sometimes influence other people.
Luke, thank you for this. Like I said, I'd heard a lot of rumblings about this and appreciate you sort of taking us inside and putting the pieces together a little bit.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jordan.
Luke LeBrun, editor of Press Progress. That was The Big Story. For more from us, head to thebigstorypodcast.ca, and you can, of course, send us your feedback on this episode or any other. We're going to record another feedback episode this week, so we'd love to hear what you think. You can always send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or call and leave us a voicemail at 416-935-5935. The Big Story is available wherever you get your podcasts, and it's on your smart speaker if you ask it to play The Big Story podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath-Rawlings. We'll talk tomorrow.
My name is John Cullen, and I want to tell you a story. It's a story about a scandal, broken relationships, gossip, rumors, money, corporate rivalry, and curling. It's the story of Broomgate, how a single broom, yes, a broom, turned friends into foes and almost killed the 500-year-old sport of curling.
It was a year I'd like to forget.
Broomgate, available now.